The hall of ash thrones smelled like hot wax and wet wool when the high oathkeeper raised his iron staff and said my name as if it were a stain. Xavier Duskwalker, stand in the witness light. I stepped into the circle with my ledger tucked to my ribs, and the sound in the room thinned to the scrape of my boots. The same dais that had laughed at me now held the air in full regalia, and 3 petition stools left empty, shoved against the carved rail like abandoned shields. The crowd was denser than ceremony required. Old houses, junior clerks, oath advocates who had no formal role in this phase but came to watch blood and law grind against each other. Sered's jaw worked before he spoke again. Kale's hands rested on the throne arms, knuckles white where the metal bit. Before these witnesses, Sered declared, the challenge to her standing will be heard, and if standing fails, the petition cycle reopens. The words moved through the chamber in low, eager murmurs. People sat forward. People pretended they were not enjoying this. Mara Quill stood at the edge of the light with soot on her sleeve and a cloth bundle tied in kitchen twine. Her chin was up. Sovet watched from the outer rank, mouth set like a cut line. Neris held her own wrists to keep them still. Ilya's prayer cords clicked between her fingers. The oath codex lay open on the altar stone, ribbon markers splayed like tongues of blood. Kale did not look at Sered when he spoke. He looked at me. Begin then, and be sure you can finish what you start. The challenge bell rang once and went silent before the echo reached the vaulted rafters. Year 947 started with rain that made the palace gutters sing day and night. By treaty choosing, the sky had cleared and every noble house in the capital had sent cloth in its colors, so the Hall of Ash Thrones looked like a field of cut banners under winter light. Servitors had polished the black floor until the braziers doubled in it. Every flame seemed to burn twice, one above and one below. I stood at the census table with my inkstone, reed nibs, and the bound roll listing petition rights. I was there to count bodies, verify seals, read names, and vanish. That was always my best skill in court. Useful, precise, forgettable. The herald called the 3 Omega petitioners in order. Neris, Ilya, Sovet. Each stepped to the treaty rail and touched palm to black glass, swearing intent before heir and court. Neris wore slate silk without embroidery, as if she were refusing to give anyone an easy category to file her under. Her calm was practiced, but not fake. I had seen her in prior sessions choose silence at exactly the moment it forced others to fill it with mistakes. Ilya's white sleeves trembled around her prayer knots. She had braided temple threads into her cuffs, and when she bowed, I saw where the fibers had worn thin from handling. Devotion had rubbed them to softness. Sovet smiled without warmth and let the hall see she was not afraid. Rings flashed on her fingers as she made oath. She held eye contact with Kale longer than etiquette advised, not because she expected favor, but because she wanted everyone to know she did not flinch from risk. Their petition was not to a council seat or a trade charter. It was for the claim itself. Blood oath, house right, bond to the heir with no undoing once sealed. I dipped my nib and wrote each name where law required, beside the year mark 947 stamped in cinnabar at the top of the page. Across the hall, the heir sat beneath the cracked obsidian crest of his line, ringed by blades and old oaths. Calvero looked carved until someone spoke to him directly. Then he moved fast, like a knife flipping in a palm. Sered stood beside the oath codex in robes stiff with gold thread. He liked to recite laws as if he had invented them. By the Codex of Succession and Blood, he intoned, pressing 2 fingers to the text so all could see. Only a reigning heir may bestow claim. No peer, no priest, no council majority may substitute. He said it for the hall. He said it for the petitioners. He said it, I would later understand, because he believed law was a room only he could unlock. A page boy moved between benches with witness tokens in a brass bowl. A court musician in the back gallery tightened a string and then stopped, reprimanded by a glance from an usher. A cough echoed and vanished. All the small noises of a large institution trying to appear eternal. I read the procedural lines in my clearest voice and kept my eyes on the roll. Names, titles, witness marks, seal impressions, simple work if no one made trouble. I had done census books through flood years and plague rationing. I knew how to keep an official record clean even when men shouted over it. Ink did not care who was angry. It only cared where the line was placed and whether the line stayed true when challenged later. Then Sered turned from the codex and pointed his staff at my table. "Read louder, Inkborn. This is not a kitchen tally." Laughter cracked from one corner, then died because Kale had not joined it. Heat climbed my throat anyway. My hand held steady because I forced it steady. My nib scratched another witness mark and left a clean line. "I am reading at legal volume," I said, without lifting my gaze. Sered's lip curled. Legal volume from legal blood would carry farther. The old insult landed like spit in public. Inkborn. Not houseborn, not oathborn, not fit for anything but copying what better blood decided. I heard cloth shift as nobles leaned to trade reactions. Someone behind the eastern pillar muttered, "He always did hate clerks with opinions." Another voice shushed hard. My ears rang so hard I almost missed my own next line. I did not answer him again. I set the roll flatter, wiped my thumb on linen, and began the clause on challenge protocol. My voice came thinner than before. The hall seemed suddenly too broad, each stone pillar another witness to me being made small, where everyone could watch. When I reached the air acknowledgement section, I looked up because procedure demanded it. Kale was already looking at me. Not a passing glance, not the brief acknowledgement he gave clerks, guards, petitioners, and rivals by habit. His attention struck and stayed, unblinking, as if someone had set a hook behind my breastbone and drawn it tight. I forgot the next line. My mouth opened on the first word and shut on air. Sered made a displeased sound. "Continue, scribe." I swallowed and tried again. The words tangled. My pulse kicked hard enough that the ribbon marker on the table trembled from the vibration in my wrist. I could feel dozens of eyes recalibrating, watching not procedure now, but me. Kale finally spoke, low and carrying. "Let her take breath." No one told the air no. Sered stepped back half a pace, face locked in control. The hall held itself between one heartbeat and the next, while I inhaled through my nose and forced sound past the knot in my throat. I finished the roll without another stumble, but I felt every second of his focus like a hand at the back of my neck. Neris noticed, her gaze sharpened. Ilya noticed and looked troubled, as if liturgy had shifted under her feet. Sovet noticed and smiled wider, predatory now. When treaty formalities paused for the interval bell, benches released in a hiss of wool and leather. Petitioners were escorted toward refreshment alcoves. Advocates clustered. Apprentices ran messages. I gathered the roll, capped my ink, and slipped from the main floor toward the side colonnade, where air moved cold between carved stone lions. I meant to scrub my hands, reset my face, and return invisible. Bootsteps followed. "Xavier." My name in his voice sounded nothing like Sered's contempt. I stopped under a hanging lamp and turned. Kale had come without escort, cloak unfastened, gloves tucked in his belt as if he had stripped protocol off while walking. The corridor light caught at the silver stitching near his collar and at the scar along his jaw that most portraits erased. "You should not be here alone," I said. "Not during petition review." His mouth tilted. "I came because I am not alone when you are in the room." The line should have sounded rehearsed in anyone else. From him it came blunt, almost irritated at his own need. He took a step closer. The iron and saffron note of his skin and ceremonial oils reached me, warm and metallic. My body reacted before my training could smother it. Pulse climbing, breath shortening, knees loose. Kale lifted his hand toward my jaw. He stopped short enough that the heat from his palm touched, but skin did not. "If I touch you now," he said, voice roughened, "the hall will read it as command. I do not want command from you." A swallow moved in my throat. "Then what do you want?" "You. Not your service, not your record hand. You." I had been desired before in whispers, in calculations, in bargains framed as favors. Never like this. Direct, almost reverent, with no room left for me to pretend misunderstanding. I set the roll on the lion plinth because my fingers had begun to shake. "I am not one of your petitioners," I said. "I know. You have 3 candidates already in the light. I know. And if you choose wrong, the court burns us both." He took another half step and looked at my mouth before dragging his gaze back up, disciplined, furious with himself for wanting what he had not yet earned. "Let it burn," he said. "I would still choose you." The words hit low and hard. My body gave me away. A shiver down my arms, breath catching, hips angling a fraction toward him without permission. I hated that he could see it. I hated more that I wanted him to. Boot soles slapped stone from the corridor bend. Mara Quill barreled into the colonnade with a copper ladle still in her belt and soot on her cheek, breathing hard as if she had run up service stairs 2 at a time. She saw how close we stood and did not flinch. "Your Grace, later," she snapped at Kale, then to me. "Now." She shoved her hand between us and opened her fist. A blackened lump of wax lay on her palm, scored with half a seal impression. "Sarid is invoking coercive succession law in the side chamber," Mara Quill said. "He says your petition rights can be voided and rerun if the record clerk is compromised. He's pulling witnesses." Kale's expression iced over. "On what grounds?" "On whatever lie he can nail to a post fast enough. He had fresh seals in his archive fire bucket. Half melted, wrong grain pattern. I saw them when kitchen ash was dumped." Mara Quill had spent 6 years in palace kitchens receiving wax-stamped grain writs before dawn, checking each impression against rotomarks so no storekeeper could skim food. I had watched her refuse deliveries worth a month of rations because a single stamp edge looked soft. She could spot forged pressure lines faster than some magistrates. If she said the seals were wrong, they were wrong. I picked up the charred wax and held it to the lamp. The ridge depth varied in a way official dies did not. Too soft at the crest, too sharp at the inner ring. Counterfeit. "Can you swear that in the hall?" I asked. She met my eyes. "I can swear what I touched." Kyle took his gloves from his belt and slammed one against the lion plinth hard enough to make the roll jump. "He forces challenge by statute before witnesses. I answer in the same hall, same days. No shadow chamber." Mara nodded once. "Then move. He's already gathering the old houses." The rest of treaty choosing finished under a blade. Sarid read out the coercive succession clause to assembled witnesses with the smugness of a man convinced procedure itself would kill his enemy for him. The law existed for genuine disputes, dead heirs, contested bloodlines, fraudulent petitions. He twisted it toward me by claiming record contamination and personal entanglement. In open hall, I gave no reaction except to write every word he spoke. Kale's voice cut in only once, asking Sarid to cite the exact subsection authorizing immediate challenge. Sarid did so, with theatrical precision, and looked around as if he had already won by naming the line. Kale nodded, as if satisfied. I knew that look. It meant he was marking where to break him later. When formal hours ended, Kale sent guards to secure the archive wing and ordered both petition rolls sealed overnight under air signet. Neris requested audience and received a curt refusal. Ilya knelt in the chapel alcove with her forehead to stone. Sovet laughed loud enough to carry down the corridor and said to anyone listening, "At last, a real fight." Night settled over the palace in layers of smoke, lamp oil, and distant sea wind. Kale found me in the records gallery where I was spreading census ledgers on a cedar table, searching for any prior challenge Sered had touched. Shelves rose in dark tiers around us, each label strip a year of births, deaths, grain tallies, marriages, levies, my place, my language. I had ink under both thumbnails and a cramp in my wrist from cross-referencing. He closed the door behind him with careful quiet and stood there, breathing as if he had been running. "We have until morning to prepare," I said without looking up. "If he proves compromised records, he can force delay. If he forces delay, petition cycle reopens, and he can stage manage witness order." I did not come for strategy first. My hands paused over the page edge. The room held stacked volumes, wax strings, and the resin scent of old boards. Somewhere below, kitchen pans clanged. Above us, storm shutters thudded once in the wind. Kale crossed to the table and laid 2 fingers near my wrist, not touching. "Earlier, in the colonnade, I said what I wanted. I did not ask what you needed." I lifted my head. Candlelight put bronze at the edge of his cheekbone and shadow in the hollow beneath his throat. I could have reached him by leaning less than a handspan. "I need not to disappear," I said. "If there is claim, it cannot turn me into your possession with a prettier title." "Then it will not." "You cannot promise that and mean it if court custom stands." "Then court custom changes." I let out a short, unbelieving breath. "You would break half the old houses for me?" "I would break all of them before I let Sered call you Inkborn again." His anger was for me and because of me, and the force of that shook loose something I had clamped down for years. I walked around the table. He did not move toward me until I nodded once. When his mouth met mine, it was not a court performance. No audience, no heraldry, no script. His hand cupped the back of my neck with restraint that cost him. Mine fisted in the front of his shirt where ceremonial thread scratched my knuckles. He tasted of clove and smoke. I heard the tiny sound he made when I pulled him closer and knew he had been holding himself on a chain all day. Desire hit sharp and immediate, a surge that made my knees weaken against the rug's raised weave. The saffron iron scent deepened. His breath broke against my cheek. Mine stuttered in answer. He kissed the corner of my mouth, my jaw, the pulse below my ear, then stopped with his forehead against mine. "Say stop and I stop," he whispered. I heard myself say, "Not yet." He drew back enough to see my face. "Not yet" means wait. I can wait. A smaller, rougher truth pushed out of me. "Not yet" means I want this, and I am afraid. Of me? Of vanishing inside what everyone else thinks this should be. Of waking tomorrow and finding I became a symbol instead of a person. He took my ink-stained hand and pressed it over his heart. "Then we do this only if you can still find yourself in it tomorrow." The words settled where panic had been. I exhaled and felt my shoulders release for the first time since Sered's staff pointed at me. We moved to the threshold between gallery and his private suite, stone under my bare feet now, because I had kicked off shoes without noticing. He reached for the inner latch, and both of us paused at once. The claim could not be unmade. Blood and oath and witness made a permanent architecture around 2 people. No revision, no annulment, no legal eraser. We stood with the latch between us and that permanence like a drawn line. I touched his wrist first. "If we cross, you do not claim me in secret and announce me later. You bind me where Sered tried to break me. Same hall, same dais. Yes. You hear me before council whenever law names my life. Yes. You do not call me yours unless I choose the word with you." A slow nod. "Then choose it when you are ready." I lifted his hand to my mouth and kissed the inside of his wrist, where pulse jumped hard. "Tonight, I choose you. Tomorrow, I choose the light." We crossed the threshold together. Dawn brought iron-gray sky and the smell of bread from lower ovens. The palace shifted into morning rhythm. Coal being carried, shutters opened, boots on flagstone. Mara Quill met me outside the washing room with a basket covered in coarse cloth. Her eyes flicked over my face once, taking inventory. Then she handed me a heel of warm loaf and said, "Eat while I talk." I did. Crust flaked onto my cuff. "I pulled what I could from the ash pail in Sered's archive," Mara Quill said. 7 seals with the same dye flaw, half burned but readable. Wrong pressure ring. Real archive fire should have cracked them cleaner. These were cooked quick and tossed to look destroyed. "Where are they now?" She tapped the basket. Under the bread sat wrapped wax pieces in salt cloth to keep edges from crumbling. I didn't sleep. I kept them under the stove where no one from Oath Office goes. If they searched servant bunks, they'd miss kitchen ash. I swallowed and pressed my fingers to the rough crust to steady them. "You may get cut for this." Mara bared her teeth. "Let him try. You still have time to step back before witness call." Not a chance. In the prep chamber beside the hall, I laid Sered's challenge ledger open under morning light. My census work had taught me how ink sits when entries are honest. Same pigment weight, same drying feather, pressure shifts matching the writer's hand over time. Sered's page was wrong. The line naming me as compromised used heavier soot-black ink than the surrounding text, and the stroke tail bit deeper into the paper as if written later on a rough board, then stitched in. I angled the page and saw the scrape where an earlier line had been abraded off with pumice. Fibers lifted where they should have lain flat. A clerk had tried to buff the surface smooth again and failed. "Tampered," I said. Kale, already armored, leaned over my shoulder. "Can you prove that aloud?" "Yes, if they let me show the grain." "They will." "Will Sered?" His mouth went hard. "He does not have that choice once the challenge bell rings." We entered through separate doors, as protocol required during contested proceedings. The second assembly opened in the same hall of ash thrones, before the same witness ranks and the same obsidian dais. Sered had demanded it by statute. Kyle had insisted on full attendance. That insistence mattered. No selective crowd, no controlled chamber, no private pressure. Neris stood in slate again, chin high despite the circles beneath her eyes. She had slept little and concealed it poorly. Ilya wore temple white and held no petition ribbon now, only prayer cords. Sovet came in crimson, smile sharp enough to cut cloth. Sered read the coercive succession clause with ceremonial relish. If contamination of process is credibly alleged, public challenge is compelled. He turned to the hall. "I allege contamination through intimacy and manipulated record." Kyle answered from the throne without rising. "You allege. Now prove." Sered called for my disqualification. I stepped into witness light before he finished the sentence and placed my palm on the codex stone. "Ask me under oath," I said. Murmurs rippled. Sered's nostrils flared. "Did you engage in private conduct with the heir between treaty session and challenge hearing?" I met his stare. "Yes." A rustle broke across benches. Sovet's laugh clicked softly against her teeth. Neris closed her eyes once. Ilya's lips moved in silent prayer. Sered lifted his staff as if he had struck gold. Then conflict stands. Record tainted. Mara Quill's voice cut across the hall. "Not by her." Every head turned. She stepped into the ring with her basket and untied the cloth. Wax fragments, blackened and ridged, lay inside like broken teeth. "State name and basis," Sered snapped. She drew to full height, soot still at her cuff. "Mara Quill, Palace Kitchens, 6 years receiving grain writs and checking wax marks against rotologs." He sneered. "A kitchen omega instructing legal office on seals?" "An omega with eyes," she shot back, "and hands that handle real writs before dawn while your clerks still snore." Kale's mouth twitched once. Not quite a smile. Proceed. Mara Quill laid one burned seal on the altar stone. This ridge should run even. It breaks here and doubles here. Same flaw across 7 pieces I pulled from your archive fire bucket. She placed each piece in a line. All carry the challenge office mark. All were half melted on purpose. Not destroyed enough to lose pattern, just scorched enough to look accidental. Sarid cut in. You cannot authenticate chain of custody. I can authenticate where I found them. You want chain? Ask why they were in your ash. A low sound rolled through the chamber. Some approval, some shock. Sarid raised his staff to reclaim command, but Kale lifted 2 fingers from the throne arm and the ushers held silence. My turn. I set Sarid's challenge ledger beside the seals and angled it toward witness benches. Entry naming me compromised is written in heavier ink than surrounding record, with different absorption at the grain. Abrasion marks beneath indicate prior text removed. Sarid barked, "Speculation!" "Demonstration," I said. I passed the ledger to the nearest witness row under guard watch and asked them to tilt the page to brazier light. One by one, heads bent. A merchant lord swore under his breath when he saw the scrape. An oath advocate asked to compare with previous lines in the same hand and then went very still. Neris stepped forward before being called. Request to inspect. Kale nodded. She examined the page, then the seals, then looked at Sarid with a strategist's cold appraisal. This is clumsy work, she said. If you intended to destroy her, you should have chosen a better forger. Sovet barked a laugh. At last we agree on something. Ilya bowed her head and spoke toward the codex stone. False witness breaks sacred order. I will not stand with this. Sarid's face went gray around the mouth. These women collude. Careful, Kale said, voice quiet and lethal. You are close to accusing the hall itself. The challenge phase twisted in front of everyone. What began as Sarid's strike became an exposure of his own manipulation. He demanded recusal. Kale denied it. He appealed to precedent. I cited line and folio from prior census disputes, where altered ink voided claim. Sarid insisted intimacy alone proved compromised voluntariness. I answered that voluntariness is determined by explicit statement under oath, not assumption by rank. Witnesses from the old houses murmured, then spoke, then openly questioned Sarid's handling of archives. One elder asked whether any other registry entries had been corrected under Sarid's tenure. Another asked why coercive statute was invoked before archive review was complete. Sarid called both lines irrelevant. The elder laughed in his face. Mara Quill did not move from her place, hands behind her back, expression flat as butcher block. Sarid made one last attempt. Even if tampering is conceded, intimacy with the heir before adjudication taints voluntariness. Any claim now reads coercive. He had waited to spring that word in full hall. Coercive. I stepped forward until my boots touched the edge of the dais shadow. Then hear me without translation. I refused invisibility. I demanded terms. He accepted them. If you call that coercion, you confess you have never listened when an Omega speaks. A hush dropped heavy and complete. Kale rose. He came down from the throne platform and stopped in front of me at equal height, not above. He turned so the hall could see both our faces. By codex authority vested in reigning heir, he said, I answer this challenge in public and end it in public. Sarid tried to object. Kyle did not grant him room. I deny the petitions of Neris, Ilya, and Sovet for the claim. The words were formal, and each landed differently. Neris bowed once, sharp and controlled, ambition folding into calculation rather than collapse. Her eyes met mine with frank assessment, then shifted to Kael, already measuring next moves. Ilya touched prayer chords to her lips, tears bright but contained. There was grief in her face, but also release, as if a door she feared had finally closed, and she could choose her own path without pretending. Sovet's jaw tightened. Rage flared across her expression like struck flint. She did not look away. Kale continued, voice carrying to the rafters. I grant the claim to Xavier before this witness body and this dais. He held out his hand, palm up. I placed mine in it. Blood oath ritual required no spectacle, only consent spoken clearly and witnessed by those empowered to contest. He drew a thin blade from his belt, sliced his own thumb, then offered me the hilt. I cut mine. The sting was immediate, clean. We pressed blood to blood over the codex stone while the hall watched and the braziers hissed. I choose, he said. I choose, I answered. Red sealed to red. Sered stood rigid, throat working. Law bound him even when pride rebelled. As High Oathkeeper, he had to ratify what he could not prevent. He lifted the ratification staff with visible effort. Recorded, he forced out. Ratified under protest. Protest noted, I said, and looked directly at him while I spoke. The same dais, the same hall, the same witnesses who had heard Inkborn now heard Chosen. Formal bells ended session. Scribes moved in to duplicate the record for archive and council. Ushers opened side aisles. The hall did not explode into noise all at once. It fractured into currents. Shock here, relief there, furious whispering near the western benches where Sered's loyalists clustered like crows. Neris approached first once formalities cleared. She did not kneel. You played a harder game than I expected, she said quietly. I petitioned for power, not love. I misread where power sat. Will you stay? I asked. A brief nod. Court still needs strategy. I am not foolish enough to leave the board. You and I will disagree often. Good. Agreement is overrated. Ilya came next, touching 2 fingers to her forehead in temple sign. I cannot remain where bond and throne are this entangled, she said. I depart for temple service by sunset. Go with honor, I said. Her smile trembled. And you rule with listening. Sovet waited until the aisle cleared. She leaned in close enough that only I heard. This is not done, she said. You have a crown now and a target to match. I will be your opposition until one of us is ash. I held her stare, then opposed me openly. She bared her teeth and stepped back, satisfaction and fury braided together. Open rival, exactly as promised. Kale reached me only after being detained by 3 delegations and 1 furious cousin. When he did not touch me first. He asked quietly, Are you still with me? Yes. Do you regret it? No. Only then did his hand settle at my back, steady and warm. Court did not settle into peace after that day. It shifted into a new kind of war fought with motions, veto threats, and old houses whispering that Sered's humiliation proved ritual corruption. His authority shrank, but men who had fed on his certainty did not vanish. They regrouped in committees and sanctuaries, trying to slow every reform I proposed. The first week after ratification, 3 petitions challenged my right to co-sign census directives. Kale overruled 2 outright and forced public argument on the 3rd, so I could answer on record. I cited codex appendices no one had read in decades. The petition failed by 7 votes. The second week, an archive clerk misplaced district ration counts tied to flood relief. Mara Quill found the bundle under a coal scuttle in less than an hour and marched it into council with soot on her elbows and no patience left. Either your filing system is drunk, she told the chamber, or someone hopes hungry people disappear when numbers do. No one laughed. The relief motion passed before dusk. The 3rd week, Sered attempted to restrict my attendance at oath reviews by claiming only bloodline principals could witness adjudication. Kale invited him to read the line aloud that excluded a formally claimed co-ruler. There was no such line. Sered read anyway, voice brittle, while half the chamber watched him unravel by degrees. Cale sat beside me through each session and let me speak first when policy touched census rolls, ration routes, or oath rights. Sometimes he won the chamber with force, sometimes I won it with records and patient demolition. We learned each other's weapons and when to sheath them. Mara Quill refused promotion 3 times and accepted only when I changed the title from servant overseer to household voice, with right of direct interruption in private counsel. If I can't cut through nonsense, she said, the title is trash. She kept the copper ladle on her belt anyway, a relic and a warning. At supper she still bullied me into eating before night hearings. At dawn she still checked seal wax on kitchen writs before assigning ovens. In private chambers she still told Cale when he was being impossible, and because she had saved us both, he listened more often than his pride preferred. Weeks later, when the first backlash petition tried to restore Sered's unilateral archive control, he entered council chamber with diminished escort and no one rose automatically. He still had rank, still had robe and staff, but the room measured him differently now. He argued law. I answered with law and memory of his forged seals laid on stone. The motion failed. Neris, now seated in strategic advisory rank, abstained publicly and sent me a note after. You were right to force transparency. I was right to withhold my vote until it mattered. We may work together yet. Ilya sent one letter from the outer temple, short and formal. She enclosed a cord knot blessed for clear judgment and wrote, I do not agree with your path, but I honor that it was chosen and spoken. I tied the knot around my ledger case. Soviet kept her oath of opposition with ruthless consistency. She did not sabotage in shadow. She challenged in chamber, in militia review, in resource debate. She voted against my district standardization plan and then submitted a better clause on barracks accountability. I accepted the clause and thanked her by name. She looked startled for half a breath, then angry all over again. I learned to sleep in fragments and still wake before first bell. I learned which courtiers lied by over-explaining and which lied by becoming suddenly brief. I learned that being visible all the time is its own endurance trial. And I learned that Cale's private reverence did not soften his public severity. It sharpened it in defense of what we had built. At dusk, after a day of hearings, I stood in the west arcade where sea wind carried brine through carved screens. Cale came up behind me, set his palm against the small of my back, and waited until I leaned into him before speaking. You are quieter when you are tired, he said. I am thinking about thresholds, I answered. How close we came to crossing the wrong one. He rested his chin near my temple. We crossed the right one because you named it. I turned, slid my hand beneath his collar where pulse beat steady. You listened. Below us, kitchen smoke rose in blue threads. Mara Quill shouted at someone in the yard for dropping a grain sack and followed it with a laugh that bounced off stone. In the outer court, Soviet trained with blunted spear against 2 guards, driving them back with savage precision. Neris crossed the archive steps carrying 3 dispatch bundles, already embedding herself in the machinery she understood best. Far down the road, temple bells answered evening tide, and I thought of Ilya walking toward them in white. The clay mark at my wrist was still tender, a thin red crescent where blood ritual had sealed. Cale touched it with the back of his fingers, asking without words. I nodded. He kissed the mark, then my mouth, slow and unhurried. No audience this time. In the Hall of Ash Thrones, ash banners would always remember both scenes, the insult and the elevation. Stone keeps echoes longer than people do. But I was no longer a voice bent over a roll hoping not to be noticed. I had been named in contempt, then named an oath, and I had chosen which name would hold. Night finally settled, and for the first time in many weeks the palace sounded ordinary. Ladles against kettles, boots on stair, distant gulls. one door closing softly somewhere below. Kale took my ink-stained hand in his blood-marked one and led me inward, not ahead, not behind, side by side. In the days that followed, ordinary remained fragile but real. We reviewed district ledgers by lamplight and argued over commas that changed tax burdens. We signed decrees until my fingers cramped. We hosted delegations who smiled at table and filed objections by dawn. We attended memorial rites for flood dead and listened to families who did not care about court rivalry, only whether grain would arrive before winter. When we entered public chamber together, some eyes still measured me as an intruder. Others watched for weakness, or spectacle, or scandal. I gave them policy instead. Numbers, names, routes, outcomes. Facts had weight, and I had spent a lifetime learning how to carry them without dropping. Mara Quill appeared in every room that mattered, sometimes with tea, sometimes with witness lists, sometimes with a look that said, "Stop speaking and listen." She was there when I rewrote oath office intake so servants could file irregularity reports without retaliation. She was there when Kale signed it. She was there when Sered refused to comment and then filed a procedural complaint that died in committee. The institution pushed back in small ways: delayed stamps, accidental omissions, senior clerks pretending not to hear direct orders unless Kale repeated them. We built counters for each obstruction: dual signature logs, public posting of docket delays, rotating archive oversight so no one office could hide revisions in private. Sered adapted by narrowing his attacks, choosing technicalities that bored half the chamber and exhausted the rest. He could still wound, but no longer with one public strike. His diminished authority did not make him harmless. It made him patient. I never forgot that. Sovit's opposition matured into a faction: younger officers, disaffected minor houses, ritual conservatives angry at my reforms but willing to deal if terms were clear. She used every opening. She also kept her word and met me in open vote, never in back corridor ambush. I respected that more than I expected. Neris, pragmatic as ever, became invaluable in treaty logistics. She corrected my blind spots in trade leverage and made me admit when moral clarity needed scheduling discipline to survive contact with reality. We disagreed sharply and often, then went back to work. Ilya's second letter arrived at midwinter with temple census totals and a note: faith communities will comply with revised ration registration if inspectors are trained in liturgical calendar. She included a training outline. I smiled when I read it and assigned implementation the same day. Kale and I learned the architecture of ruling beside each other. In public, he signaled support without swallowing my voice. In private, he asked hard questions and expected honest answers. We fought once over militia provisioning, loud, bitter, unresolved until dawn, then presented a joint plan at first bell and passed it by noon. Trust did not mean ease. It meant not weaponizing each other's fear. Some nights I still woke with Sered's Inkborn in my ears. On those nights I went to the records gallery, lit one lamp, and touched the ridged spine of the treaty choosing roll where my handwriting shifted at the line I had nearly failed to read. Proof that fear had happened. Proof that I had continued anyway. At the next renewal assembly in the Hall of Ash Thrones, attendance overflowed into side aisles. People came expecting theater. They got procedure, accountability reports, district metrics, and a formal review of archive integrity protocols. Half left, disappointed. The other half took notes. Kale spoke last. "Law is not diminished when challenged in daylight," he said. "It is diminished when handled in secret." He did not look at Sered when he said it. He looked at the chamber as a whole. Afterward, in the corridor where he had first stopped short of touching my face, we stood for a moment in silence. I placed my palm against the carved stone lion and remembered the heat of his hand hovering, the ache of wanting, Mara Quill's breathless warning, the charred wax in her fist, all the hinges that had turned at once. "Do you ever wish," he asked quietly, "that I had looked away that day in the hall?" I thought about it long enough that he waited without pressing. "No," I said, "but I am glad you stopped before touching me." His expression softened, fierce and fond at once. "So am I." We walked back toward Chamber Call as bells began to ring, and I felt the familiar weight of Ledger at my side, not as shield now, but as instrument. Names still mattered. Records still mattered. Witness still mattered. What had changed was that I no longer mistook invisibility for safety. By spring, the city had begun repeating a shortened version of our story that flattened all the difficult parts. Heir chooses scribe, old priest falls, court adapts. It made good tavern talk and bad governance history. The truth was less neat and more useful. We were still contending. Sarid still maneuvered. Sovit still opposed. Neris still bargained. Ilya still prayed us toward better choices from a distance. Mara Quill still caught danger early because she watched what others dismissed. And I, Xavier Duskwalker, still wrote everything down. When storms came again and gutters sang through the night, I stood at the council window and listened. Year 947 had opened with rain and overturned the architecture of my life before winter ended. The work after that was not romance and not victory lap. It was continuity. Choosing, recording, defending, revising, choosing again. Kale joined me at the window, shoulder brushing mine. "What are you counting now?" he asked. "Not what?" I said. "Who?" He followed my gaze toward the lower yard where torchlight moved. Kitchen staff changing shift, guard rotations crossing. 2 junior clerks carrying sealed packets under wax cover. Mara Quill in the center of it all directing traffic with her ladle like a field marshal. He smiled. "Your household anchor terrifies half my guard." "Only half?" "Give her time." I leaned into him, tired and steady. "We have it." Below us, the palace kept moving, imperfect, loud, resistant, alive, and above us the ash banners in the Hall of Ash Thrones hung still, waiting for the next assembly, the next challenge, the next set of names that would decide what the law meant when spoken aloud.